Okay, today on the show we have Albert and Sebastian from 8base. Welcome.
Hey, Ben. It's good to be here.
Awesome to have you both. Why don't you give us a brief intro on your background, what 8base is, and sort of tell the listeners what you've been building?
Yeah, sure. So if Sebastian, if it's okay, I'll just take the lead on that. So I'm Albert. I started my career as an engineer a long time ago. Have worked in, let's call it enterprise software and high growth SaaS companies for all of my career. My last two companies, the first one started in 2001, later exited, and then the second one in 2009, a company called CareCloud, which has since exited as well. Both of those were complex multi-tenant SaaS companies, specifically for healthcare, although healthcare is not uniquely my background. But we built, some of the most complex SaaS products in the world. And out of that experience, I felt like much of the work that my engineering teams were doing on any given day could be abstracted away into a platform. It was especially frustrating after raising so much venture capital. And after a few years in those companies that you would say, if you talk to the engineering team and 80% of the work was on what we call non-unique systems. And so in 2016, I left the day-to-day and started looking at the space, realized that it was called low-code development platform by the analysts. I was familiar with many of the platforms that existed there. And if you look at the platforms at the time, they were more what I would call the legacy players. But we could see that the growth in the space was going to be enormous. And so that really led me to just jump in with both feet, raise capital, and get the company going. And I'll stop there and let Sebastian introduce himself.
Hey, my name is Sebastian. And so Albert and I actually met about 3-4 years ago when I moved back to Miami to start my own company at the time, which was a virtual role-play simulation training technology company. So we're using virtual reality to train salespeople and let them go on virtual sales calls to gain experience. And so he was on the board of that company, gave me some great advice. I was always a product engineer. I was always an engineer, so more deeply technical. Built a fantastic product, but not a fantastic sales organization. So after about 3 years of burning through all my fundraising, I decided that maybe it's time to go learn another set of skills before I take the next whack at it. And Albert was generous enough to say we could use you over at 8base. So it's been a really fun time. Almost a little over a year now since I joined on, but it's been a really cool product, to work on and whatnot. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's funny that I'm chatting with two technical people or have technical background, which isn't usually the case, or it's more about talking about the point and click people. But I think this is a good opportunity for us to talk about how, like, no code isn't no code. Like, that's not quite the right thing. And yeah, you said, Albert, that you were getting into the space around 2016 with the low code was what it was sort of called then, and I suppose there is like a mix of that now, and that's pretty early on in no-code terms, I guess. I think the no-code movement only really happened last 12, 18 months or so, I think. What have you seen as like some of the biggest changes from people taking some stuff from low-code and whacking it under no-code too, or is it still quite different, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting, Ben, because I have perspective on this that dates back probably longer than most people. People have been talking about fourth generation languages and things like that from the 1980s. And admittedly, I was a working developer in the late 80s, so I've seen a lot. I think that I had probably been thinking about low code, no code for at least 15 years. But it didn't have the name. But I recognized a long time ago that the work that I was doing, either as an engineer or in managing engineers, was repetitive, and a lot of it was wasteful. And it may have been new to a developer, but it wasn't new to me. And it's like, well, why do I have to rebuild things every single time? And then computing architectures were changing. I saw mainframe, I saw client server, I saw web, and web itself has changed. But I felt that with the advent of modern cloud, which really, if you look at when was that, it's really 2006 when AWS first came out. And AWS wasn't much back then. But you could see that part of what the possibility of building a platform on top of that computing infrastructure became possible. The analysts, I think, have done us a little bit of a disservice in the sense that they've grouped low code, no code as if they're synonymous terms and into this one big category. And when you really look at it, there are a lot of different tools that are intended for many different purposes. There isn't one tool that's going to be a winner takes all. That is highly unlikely, because there are so many different categories of software to be built, and no tool is really going to solve all of them.
No, I mean, I even talk about that with, you think of any productivity tools, there's companies who try and do everything, database, documentation, wiki, like everything else, Kanban boards, but it's all good and well doing that. But I think people still have their own preferences of how something works or how something looks, the UI, the UX, whatever it is. There's always some differences. So I just don't think there'll ever be a one tool does everything, which then lends itself to like you said, there's lots of things which have similar structure on the back end of setting up these things over and over again. And I think the one thing maybe a lot of people overlook in no code, low code is we're all trying to just build software. Like we're trying to democratize building software. And if you're a developer or if you're not a developer, people still don't want to do the repetitive stuff, like creating that framework and all those sorts of things. So what does 8base actually do? I realized I haven't asked you to introduce 8base as a product and tell us a bit about what it does.
Yeah, well, what I would tell you is what 8base does is a moving target. So I'll tell you what it does today.
Yeah.
And our focus in terms of low code, because again, there's so many things you can choose to do. We decided to go down what I would call the less popular path of trying to really pour cement around the back end of things. Many of the companies have gravitated towards visual UI builders. Those are great, but a lot of times what you end up with is that the back ends fall apart under scale. So our intention was let's try to create this incredibly powerful back end that we can also democratize. So in other words, even though it's incredibly powerful, it doesn't mean you have to have a huge amount of money or a lot of technical capability to use it. You can use it easily, get it up and running, but when you scale, you're not going to have to replace it. And so what is a backend? A backend in its most sort of basic form is database, object storage, and computing power. We've layered a bunch of services around that to augment the definition of a backend and also provision it in a way that is incredibly unique and incredibly powerful. The provisioning that I'm talking about is primarily the GraphQL API that we lay on top of it. So you can easily define your backend, your data model. It's a relational data model primarily. You can attach NoSQL databases and things to it. You can define roles and rights, which complex software requires that type of thing. You can permission down to the field level. You can add capabilities like serverless computing. So if you need to create backend functions, you can run those in 8base. 8base will hyperscale to meet demand, and then it will come down. You pay for what you use. But the GraphQL API is reverse engineered from the definition of that backend. So you're never having to do real API development or mostly not. And a front-end developer or a front-end tool can immediately grab that and begin writing front ends without ever having to worry about the back end.
Awesome. So do you think there's ever, you said it's a moving target, I think lots of companies are, what do you think that you'll ever go down that drag and drop style? Is that ever a future? Like, I'm trying to think of me as a real no coder to use something that's more, you have to understand code or how it fits together. Do you think there's going to be a crossing over of that at some point?
I don't rule it out, but what I would tell you is that there's the unspoken in all of this. Okay, and here's what I mean by that. If a person, especially a citizen developer, has all these tools in front of them, it doesn't necessarily mean they know how to design complex software. So just because they can drag and drop widgets on the front end, manipulate data models on the back end easily, doesn't mean that the software is well constructed.
Yeah.
And so 8base's mission is really to continue, its roadmap is centered around how do we continue to deliver things that allow you to build comprehensive software that take care of a lot of the heavy sort of computer science parts away from that, and get to a point where the effort that is required to stand up software is minimal. So what do I mean by that specifically? What's harder to build, multi-tenancy or to make your screens look the way you want them to look? I would say that multi-tenancy and how that all works with complex roles, permissions, personas, security requirements at the API, at the user interface level, that's a much harder thing for people to grasp.
Yeah.
Most engineers have never done that work. But if you think of any SaaS company, or what's more important than a SaaS company today is a micro-SaaS company, because micro-SaaS is exploding, right? People don't even know they're a micro-SaaS, but that's what they are.
Yeah.
Right. And we can talk a little bit about what that is. But my point is that type of engineering is what we're wanting 8base to bring, because we believe that the styling of the UI is actually a thing that millions of people in the world can do well, right? It's very visual. A non-technical founder, for instance, can see what they want, they can demand what they want, and any front-end developer can do that work for them. But it's the other parts that are harder.
Yeah, that's naturally why most of the tool sets have been developed towards that, because it's like, hey, what's the immediate action that the person's trying to take? But a lot of these things that Albert is mentioning right now kind of boil back to something that he mentioned in the beginning, which is, we went over quickly, I think is the importance, the idea of the non-unique systems, which is the idea that when someone says, hey, I have an idea for an app, right? What they're usually thinking of is, I see an interface in my head and I know what data I want on that interface. That is the app idea of the 21st century for the most part. Mm-hmm. Now, everything that enables that in the background is what we kind of termed a non-unique system, right? There's many unique ways that you could develop those systems, but to the core idea, which is what you're trying to bring to market, whether or not you employ this strategy or that strategy isn't going to necessarily change the customer's relationship to the product or service that you're bringing, right? And so the less time that you spend kind of reinventing those systems or re-engineering those systems, and the more time that you spend getting to work on that interface, which the person's actually going to be interacting with, or being more thoughtful about how are you collecting your business data, visualizing it, reporting and whatnot, that's where you're really going to drive value for the organization. And so we're constantly looking at, hey, what are the things that in the abstract are just completely, non-specific to the projects that that people are kicking off, because that's the way that we can drive the most efficiency on development timelines. So
yeah.
What about so in that vein of, I've got an app idea, a lot of people, when I hear that, it actually can be broken down to you're thinking of a marketplace. It's a marketplace style. You want to have something, there's a platform, there's a service, and there's a seller. Mm-hmm. But even if you say that so bluntly to someone and say, okay, well, this is sort of what you want a page that does this, a page that does that, and a page that does this other thing. Mm-hmm. There still always seems to be, oh no, but I want it slightly differently, or I want this thing to be slightly different, with all these tiny nuanced pieces of what people think they want or need for their platform to be successful. How does that relate to the actual building blocks that you're providing? Does that need to be baked in, or is it easier than that?
So an analogy I like to use sometimes is if someone wanted to make a masterpiece of art, right? There's no way they can use paint by numbers, right? That won't work, but they could use a pre-stretched canvas, right? So it's there's elements of bringing that to where you can use something that's existing, and then at what level do you overlay your vision, right? And so that's kind of one of the ways I delineate on the UI builders. is because most of the UI builders is more of a paint by numbers experience, to where that flexibility is usually restricting. You have to literally break the tool to really go beyond.
Yeah.
Versus where we're sitting, which is like, at the data layer backwards right now, most of that nuance happens in the visual interface, which then you go ahead and you can use any tool, whether that's a UI builder like a retool, which is super cool, and we just published an awesome tutorial on that, or you're building a custom JavaScript application and you can do whatever whatever JavaScript will allow you to do.
Yeah.
Or a combination, Sebastian, right? So it's like, because you could use Retool is marketed as a tool for internal company development. Mm-hmm. So you could think of using Retool to build the inside of the company's capabilities while having a custom JavaScript, web or mobile app or whatever it might be that is the customer facing part. But the point is, there are different requirements based on different personas and different types of software, different types of products.
Absolutely.
So what are some of these? You give an example then. What are some other examples of what you've seen people build with 8base?
We tried to build a platform that was going to be suitable for what we thought was what most low-code or no-code products were not solving for, which is digital products. It's things that would be externally facing. Because, for instance, if you're building internal applications for your employees, 8base is great for that, but there might be no-code tools that you can use because the UI might not be as important for that. But if you're looking at things that are externally facing, where you need full customization, you need hyper scaling, because think of something that requires massive scaling or seasonal scaling requirements. You don't want to have all this server capacity that you're allocating, and you need a product that can handle it. And then you need inexpensive user accounts, because some of these low code products are like $90 per user per month. Yeah. And that's not going to work in a B2C sort of setting. So what we have, we have two flavors of customers. We have customers that use the platform themselves. They're building all sorts of stuff, and some of them are building internal tools. So it really varies. And then there's projects where we bring our service as well. Most of the time, we've done in those cases, we've done full-blown SaaS solutions, where we've taken the lead on design and development on top of our platform, and marketplaces as well, like multi-persona, two-sided marketplaces with admin capabilities as well.
Do you think there's I feel like there's this passion economy rising up, and there's like individual businesses or individual SaaS companies, one-person businesses. Do you think the rise of this is helping power some of these things and thinking like these micro SaaS niche businesses? Yeah. I mean, I'm part of Earnest Capital, are one of our investors who invest in these kinds of businesses, and we're just seeing more and more individuals raising funds to invest in these types of companies too, and just seeing that so many more people are doing things that we never think about, and they just like have their own SaaS thing.
100%. So I'll tell you how I think about this. If you ask me what's the most successful low-code, no-code company in existence, you might be surprised by my answer. And I'll tell you what that is. I would say it's Shopify. Okay, so you never see them talking about low-code, no-code. They're not covered in the analyst reports. You now saw that BigCommerce had a big, IPO, super successful. My belief is that where the economy is headed, and then the reason those companies have done well is because there's been lots of people that said, I'm going to be, solo employee, solo entrepreneur, and I'm going to create a storefront and I'm going to sell products. Well, I think the analog to that is the person who doesn't have a product to sell other than their service, and they're trying to technology enable that. And so what you're going to see is the emergence of the solopreneur or the small entrepreneur that's standing up a micro SaaS around what they're doing. And so in order to do that, our goal is to facilitate full stack development of those things, including the front end. But the concept of headless is incredibly important in all of that. So if you borrow a page out of the big commerce playbook, a big part of what they've been able to do, and part of the reason they've swum upstream, is because they have this headless e-commerce backend, right? And so what we're saying is that same type of concept is what's going to be required to win the day. Because if you're looking to rule out what a low-code or no-code platform can do for you, the more things it has, or the more chances of you ruling it out, right? That it doesn't fit. Where if it has flexibility, especially flexibility at the API level, now you're talking about a whole different type of fit. Your product can actually handle many, many use cases.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you spot on with Shopify is one of those things, and it is one of those that you said, I think at the start, you've been interested in no code, low code for 15, 16 years or so. People forget that like it's actually been a thing. It just wasn't called no code, but lots of things were called low code for a long time. And yeah, I don't think that's the focus piece that people are focusing on now, but I don't think that's less than the bigger movement actually is. It's more about how far can like one person, a small team go, and how big can they be, just as like, it's like the resurgence of the mom and pop shops, but on the internet. Like, I think you see so many people, or there's always someone, even like out of my family, who are not in tech at all or anything, but there's someone that they know who's got like their own little business online somewhere doing something. Yeah. It's just more and more popular, and I think it's just going to get way more popular. So it seems like you're trying to build almost like that Shopify layer for these micro-SaaS entrepreneurs who are coming out.
What's also very important to realize about the Shopify example, especially when talking about low code, no code, because of the negative rep that kind of gets amongst the technical community, is that these are not only productivity tools for people without the skills to do them.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I can't think of a talented developer right now that I know that wouldn't tell you, if you said, I'm thinking of doing an online e-commerce store, that wouldn't say, go use Shopify.
Yeah, exactly.
And very similar, I actually found this fascinating when we exploring the MakerPad partnership, to where, you introduced yourself as saying, like, I was never technical, so I had to do this. But a large percentage of your guys' community is all engineers. So people that are fully technical, fully capable of building software, but they recognize the productivity benefit of bringing pre-built components to any project. And so in this kind of micro SaaS economy where, maybe your idea doesn't justify a big development budget or a year development, timeline, whether or not you are capable of embarking on that.
Or by the way, a slug of venture capital, because that's the other thing that happens to these micro SaaS companies.
Absolutely. No, it's really, really cool that we're seeing people actually adopting these tools for purely the efficiency benefit of knowing that, hey, I can accomplish what I'm looking to accomplish using this service for whether it's a free thing or a $25, $50 a month subscription, whatever it might be. But yeah, kind of improve your career and financial future in a meaningful way on an expedited timeline. So, yeah,
no, I think that's so important. Just to like reiterate that fact that we're all like the same team. It's not one versus the other, and it's not because my path's better than your path or any. It's just we're trying to get to something. But realistically, who doesn't want to get there the quickest way with the least, like the path of least resistance? And yeah, I think a lot of people think, well, people are trying to push no code for the sake of it being no code. And some of it is just like, oh, I built this Airbnb style clone in Webflow because I just wanted to see if I could, like, as a test. I know that it's not going to be like a scalable thing like Airbnb. Like, that wasn't the point at all. It's just to see where you can push these things. But yeah, I think people forget that sometimes. Sometimes it is learning, but other times it's like, yeah, we have 25% are developers on MakerPad, and they're like, yeah, I hate writing this. I hate it. There's developers at companies and you're like, oh, can we just get the developers to build like a really small tool? It'll take them like 5 minutes. I'm sure like they won't mind just to like build this thing. It'll give me an alert when this thing happens. That is the last thing that the developers ever want to do. They would just be like, well, can't you just figure out or do it yourself? And this whole movement helps push that forward, I think, definitely.
Yeah. No, it's true. So, and it's just, and it's just, it's a progression of abstraction too. Cause like, the first time I ever looked at a no code, solution, I kind of got a little persnickety about it, cause I almost thought of it as threatening, but then I was looking, I was like, well, it's like the first thing I ever do when I'm writing, a script is, or whatever is, look if there's an NPM package that solves this. So I can just import it, find the function or the method on that, and then get it done, and then say I wrote the code, Yeah. And so it's just taking that to, to the next level. But it's cool. It's cool how it all kind of stacks on top of each other.
Yeah, for sure. Albert, you mentioned about the VC side of things. How do you think this whole movement around Micro-SAAS and individuals and everything else, how is that going to go, I guess, downstream, upstream? How is that going to change the ecosystem, do you think?
Yeah, so I think that by definition, a lot of these Micro-SAAS companies are not venture backable beyond seed funding, just because, VCs are looking for a large enough addressable market, large enough market opportunity where they can get a unicorn out of these companies, right? And so most of these companies are not something you can form around that thesis, but at the same time, they can provide a really nice lifestyle business for people. But the concept of building a SaaS product to convert your service to a subscription in its simplest form has been out of reach for most people because of the capital requirements, the technical knowledge that you required. But that is now changing. So I think that, again, in the same spirit of solopreneur wants to have a product that they want to sell, or they want to have a service that they want to sell, those services will begin becoming micro-SaaS opportunities. And there might be funding vehicles that will support those. One of the ones that I'm really excited about is these lenders that can lend based on your recurring revenue. We have a client that does that. It's called Bigfoot Capital. They're based in Colorado. We help them with the software development, and they, our 8base helps them, connect your Stripe, connect Plaid, connect Xero and QuickBooks, run an algorithm, do an analysis, and based on what we see of your financial profile, we can give you a lending limit, right away, and then lend against your recurring revenue. It's a great way to finance these companies so that they can grow without the micro-SaaS owners, giving away the store in terms of equity and having to report to VCs and board meetings and all this fun stuff.
Yeah, I think I looked at a startup, Pipe, that does the same sort of thing. It converts MRR to like your ARR right now, sort of thing. Right. It sells that asset, which is, I think really interesting. I think there's loads of, there's these rolling funds now. I don't know if you've seen them through Angel List, and I'm raising one for the no-code and low-code, like that side of things. There's, more individuals who are in a certain space, like know something, like more of a founder operator, that are then like allowing to, like they can actually talk about them publicly. They can raise continuously. They can be a quarter subscription, basically, that helps you then invest in these companies. I think things like that, things like the earnest model, which is more of a shared earnings agreement, and things like Bigfoot Capital, these are all huge, like seemingly small, but huge improvements for this whole like movement, which I think is all very interlinked, definitely.
100%. It's great to see the financial side of things sort of evolving to match the need.
Yeah, and I think it's necessary, because if all these no-code things were happening and there's someone who built something without a big team and is like doing okay but can't quite like take the leap to do it full time for a year or something, it stops that, and it like stops it in its tracks, where that should not be the barrier. And the alternative is trying to convince yourself mostly and VCs that you're going to be a billion-dollar company one day, when you might be a 21-year-old just out of like college or whatever that is just trying to do this. But you did say lifestyle business. Like, so many people do have a negative connotation with like what a lifestyle business is, and I think it's very broad. But
yeah, well, I actually
it's such a lifestyle-driven culture. Like all pop culture these days, all about lifestyle, how you project yourself on like and stuff like that. It's like, what sounds better than a lifestyle business? You know, like doing way better than any salary and running your own thing. You know,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah, look, I like to use the example, Ben, actually not of the 21-year-old. I like to use the example of the 35 to 40-year-old who's been gainfully employed, has a great skill set, has contacts, has some money in their pocket, but wants to sort of leave corporate America or corporate whatever and create their own thing, right? And so their own thing could be, what they do, what they're trained at, what they're an expert at, what they're best in the world at, the technological instantiation of that, but they don't really have technical skills. And so that is a great example of a micro-SaaS that comes out, and they might have a very successful run with it, be able to sell more business than they could handle if they were doing it on a consulting basis, make those into subscriptions, and do very, very well with it without having to take external investor money or maybe bring investor money, but not the kind of money that's expecting you to grow into a unicorn.
Yeah, no, definitely. What's on the horizon for 8base, and what else are you really excited about in this like growing space and what you guys are building?
So we've got a pretty aggressive roadmap that we're tackling right now. We're getting ready to release what we would call some. We're already using it internally, but we're going to release it to the outside world. Some continuous integration capabilities. So we can have, sort of dev, test, production, which is something that a lot of the low-code, no-code tools lack, truthfully, but it's like professional sort of CI/CD capabilities into the product. We're also getting ready to release a product for digital agencies. So right now, 8base is call it a per workspace price. We're going to release the concept of an organization where they can have multiple workspaces, multiple development teams, all sharing in a shared environment of workspaces of different types, and be able to monetize that work as well. So sort of sell 8base as their own infrastructure,
right,
and be able to mark it up, provide managed services on top of it, and have all the capabilities inside the product to do all that.
Yeah, I actually just talked about a couple of companies. Webflow does this with, like, I think that's how it's helped them. I was speaking to a company trying to do Chrome extension, no code builder. And I was like, some of the interesting pieces that other companies have done, like Webflow, is allow someone to build a business using Webflow as their like business. Yeah. And they just run that agency as using all that stuff. So yeah, interesting. It'd be interesting to see this when this comes out for sure.
Yeah. The agencies, just so you know, like we have a number of agencies that use the product. They started out with maybe one project, and then next thing you know, they're like, I want to convert everything I've got to 8base. I'm training my people on 8base. They're blogging about 8base. They're doing meetups, showing stuff about 8base. And we also have IBM Global Services as a customer that uses 8base for some pretty complex stuff that they've done in Europe. So the value to an agency is enormous, especially a smaller one, because it's like you can build super comprehensive digital products without back-end developers to a large extent, right? So your front-end developers can do a lot of whatever minimal back-end work might be needed. It's DevOps free, so you don't need AWS architects or DevOps folks. You don't mostly need back-end developers. So digital agency with more of a thin staff, mostly front-end focus, can get full stack work done really, really well.
Yeah.
And then, at least for me, most importantly, then the maintainability over time of that backend application is extremely manageable and then updated on our end, so you hear about it all the time to where an agency stood something up, a little Node app on Heroku or something like that. And then 3 years down the road, that's no one's cracking that code, and so it this kind of removes that element of the equation towards shared infrastructure across all these, or shared architecture across all these projects, each one with their own infrastructure, but that being managed over time, it's always up to date. You can count on it. So,
yep,
awesome. Well, yeah, we're really excited to show off some more tutorials and things, and showing what APIs can do in the crossover between no code and low code, and trying to inject some of that in there without pissing people off, I suppose. But we, I mean, yeah, it's all part of why we are so happy to have you on as partners, is showing that it's not like pick sides. It's this whole movement around democratizing software development, that we're all in the same boat. So yeah, I don't know if you've got any closing thoughts about the space or what you're up to and anything else.
No, a little while ago, it's funny, we wrote an article. Instead of calling it low code, it's way better to call it less code. Because every developer is totally fine with being like, oh yeah, like I minimized the amount of code, like I condensed it and like that, and like that's all. Like, hey, just write less code when you're building projects, And so like, it's a friendlier term, I guess. But
yeah,
any closing thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think there's again, I think the most important thing is that there are a lot of different low code, no code companies. Many of which, some of the household names are not necessarily part of the MakerPad community because it's not appropriate. We're talking about OutSystems and Mendix and even Salesforce.com. These are all much more enterprisey sort of solutions, and many of them much more, antiquated than your roster, for instance. But the analysts, if you take a look at what Gartner says about this, they say that by 2024. A very large percentage, something like 65% of all software written in the world will be done using these platforms, and that the average company will have at least 4 of these products, which should inform people that this is not a winner takes all, that this is about picking the best product for the use case that you have, but it's about working smart. The way to win in the new world is to not draw an early conclusion that none of these tools can help you. It is to research the tools and start disqualifying them for whatever reasons, but start there. It is a low-code first approach to technology. And that is what I think the big mind shift has to be, because there's, especially engineering teams in general, they just start from the premise they got to build it from scratch. And that's a flawed assumption.
Yeah, I think you've summed that up perfectly there, with like, that's the mindset to be taking, and what more and more people should be doing. And I think that's definitely spilling out into more circles now. You definitely see it across different spaces and everything else, and different job functions. So yeah, I really appreciate you both coming on. Like I said, really pumped to have you as partners. And why don't you just tell the folks where they can find you and 8base, and we can call it a day.
Yeah, Ben, thank you so much for having us on. This has been great. We're proud members of the community, and you can find us at www.8base.com. You can begin using the product for free. If there's any questions, you can reach us. It's easy, Albert at 8base.com, and we'd love to stay tuned for many of the collaboration type tutorials that we're going to be producing. The first one's going to be how do you use 8base and Retool together, but we're going to continue working with you guys on some of these other ones.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Great talking to you, Ben.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, Ben.
Bye.
Take care.